Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Marketing for Higher Ed SIG podcast. My name is Louis Zmich, and I am an assistant marketing professor at the University of Tampa. This podcast series is made to flow along with the panel sessions that happen at AMA. So summer AMA, winter AMA, not often can everyone attend those panel sessions. And so we thought that through Higher Ed SIG, we were able to offer some sort of podcast medium for practitioners, educators, and students alike to tune in and learn a little bit more about our panelists and any special guests that we have along the way. This episode, I'm really excited to sit down and talk with Chelly Conley from KnowBe4. Just a little bit about Chelly. Chelly has 10 years of experience in human resources and the human resource industry, currently working as the DEI consultant and director of global diversity, equity, and belonging for KnowBe4. Her expertise has developed into DEI, advocacy, coaching, mentoring, training, and employee engagement. She's on the board of directors for Florida National Diversity Council. She also is the director of diversity on the board of directors for Tampa Society for Human Resources chapter that focuses on creating initiatives to foster diversity and inclusion within the chapter. Chelly is certified in HR and diversity, currently holding the SPHR, the SHRM SCP, CDP, and CDE certifications. She's also an alum of St. Leo University and has a master's in business administration. Chelly and I just got done having a wonderful conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, both in the workplace as well as things that marketing practitioners can do to get students acclimated with their own thoughts, their own backgrounds, and using those thoughts to create a more diverse and inclusive environment as they get into the workforce. So I hope you enjoy this. And if you do, I hope you share it with others who would enjoy it as well. And we look forward to having more episodes brought to you by the Higher Ed SIG. Thank you. Chelly, thank you for joining me today and spending some time talking about DEI and how to incorporate that in the classroom. You'll be speaking at the summer AMA for our Marketing for Higher Ed SIG panel session. And so this is a nice way for people that either can't attend or want an extra deep dive in some of our panelists to listen to our conversation today and just get some more insight. So again, I thank you for your time today. And so if you can introduce yourself, tell us who you are, a little bit about your journey, your role at KnowBe4, and get us up to speed of who you are.
Of course, of course. So thank you so much, first of all, for having me. Super looking forward to the session that's coming up this week. I can't believe how fast time goes, and that's here already. I feel like we were just talking about that at the beginning of the year, and now it's here.
I feel like I was just sending out emails to everyone, coordinating. Now all of a sudden you're going to be flying to San Francisco. So
not exactly. So super excited to be here and super excited for this week as well too. So as you said, so I'm Chelly Conley. I am the director of global diversity for KnowBe4. A little bit about me. So I have 10 years experience within the DEI HR realm. I grew up in human resources. I was pretty lucky as a kid in college. I actually knew what I wanted to do probably in my senior year. So I was able to kind of focus on that on my way out. And I realized how much of a blessing that is because I changed my major like 2 or 3 times before I got to that point. So I understand how overwhelming that is when you get into the last period. But I knew I wanted to do human resources. I loved training and development. I loved coaching. I love mentoring. I love cultural competency. So even though I'm on this UT podcast, I basically have gone to every school but UT at this point. I originally got my bachelor's at University of South Florida, and then I got my MBA from St. Leo.
Got it. Okay, so if we can skirt any rivalry, we'll have to have you on campus and then speak to our students that way.
Exactly. But so I went to St. Leo for my MBA. I actually just recently got that within the last year or so. I started out in recruiting. I did a little bit of everything within human resources, from recruiting to generalist work, all incorporating DEI, and then getting into benefits, employee relations, which that was the doozy. And then leading into my full-time role now with KnowBe4 as the director or global director of DEI as well too. Also in my personal time as well, which I feel weird saying like personal because it probably sounds like I don't have a life when I'm about to say what I'm about to say. But I'm also on 2 different boards. I'm on the board of directors for National Diversity Council, and then I'm also the director of diversity for the Human Resources Tampa chapter, which is connected to SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resources as well. And also I'm a mental health first aid instructor. So I do a lot. I'm all over the place. But as my role with KnowBe4, I basically focus on all things DEI, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you right now about this. Because as you could tell from our previous conversations, I could talk anybody's face off about DEI. So
you were the perfect candidate, right, for this, and so we had chatted before about how a lot of, as marketing educators, it's our job to connect marketing practitioners like yourself and our students in the classroom, and all of our research should make those tie connections to all 3 work together. And in our conversations, you had talked about how having a DEI mindset is something that is really important. You just displayed throughout your whole career of having this DEI mindset. But as we talked about before, the definition of that can vary. So what is a DEI mindset? How would you define that? What type of lens do we need to view our marketing and our business practices through?
So I know that's like a really like broad statement of like what is a DEI mindset.
Yeah, broad. We're starting broad and narrowing down here.
Exactly. So it's like I'm going to try to bring it down for everybody, because I know that's something that if anybody has sat through any type of DEI training or webinar, a lot of the times it's really easy to start talking in like big strategy focused areas with DEI and not really understand what the tactical looks like. And having a DEI mindset has to transcend not only professionally, but also personally. DEI is about a self journey before you can even get into the professional aspect of DEI. Because a lot of the issues I think now within like our industry related to DEI is anybody thinks that they can do DEI. And that's problematic. Because without actually understanding the programming aspect of it and the strategic aspect of it as well too, like there's multiple parts to DEI outside of just the cultural competency and being like, socially aware and things of that nature, but also how to roll that into an organization strategically and with the business mindset as well too. And outside of that, that's the professional aspect. There's then the personal journey of understanding and humbling yourself almost. It could get uncomfortable in the journey, but understanding that it's not going to be about you. You have to decenter yourself in a lot of the conversations that you have, and being pragmatic as well too. Like when you're having conversations with people, and sometimes difficult conversations with people around DEI issues, even in the workplace, it can't come necessarily from your lens. You have to be open-minded and understand that it's not about you and your version of what's right and wrong, and also understanding that multiple realities can exist at the same time, and that's okay. And what's right for somebody else may not be right for you, but both can exist at the same time. And so being able to understand that you have to understand the concepts of your own identity and how you perceive the world and how the world perceives you before you can even start to try to listen to somebody else's lived experiences and shared experiences and digest how the world perceives them or how you perceive them. I know that was a lot.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And a thought came to mind as you were walking through that. So as far as in-class activities that we can do to introduce a DEI mindset to students, would you think that it's more along the lines of having open dialogue conversations of where are you coming from on this issue, and let's talk about your mindset and everything that has led up to this opinion that you have versus other people in the classroom, and then we can work through those opinions? How do you foresee classroom discussion that would then help you on your end of when you hire our students.
No, and I love that. I love the latter of what you were just talking about, because that's how you have difficult conversations, is that you seek to understand and you try to peel back some of those layers, because if you can understand somebody's background, their lived experiences, and like, their perspectives, it can kind of help you connect the dots of like, okay, I can see how they came to this opinion and why it might be different from mine. And so even using things like the identity wheel, I think it's literally titled like Identity Wheel Workforce America, and it breaks down the different dimensions of people's identity and what makes us up, and having discussions around that with students, because a lot of the times you have people that are very much like, what's in it for me, like a very individualistic, I feel like, is common within like the American culture. And so how you break down some of that is you get people to care. Like if a student is talking with someone and hears their story and can connect through emotions, and maybe someone that's different from them, they will all of a sudden start to care about that person, meaning that they might start to care about that person in their community and their issues. You have to make those type of connections with people in order to understand and for most people, in order to start to care. You have people in the world who are huge empaths and care about everyone and everything, but a lot of people, because we're so especially from the American like culture perspective, we're so on the grind, we're so focused on our own issues and what we're trying to go through in the world and stuff like that as well too, that sometimes it's easier to have a blind spot to things when it's not directly impacting you or your community. But that's something else that kind of relates to, I think, having that discussion and getting students to think outside the box as well too, is having the understanding that if other communities are being impacted, like, with what's going on right now with LGBTQ and like their rights and things like that, people have to understand what would make the difference of that being you one day. If it can happen to other people, it can happen to you, which is why other people should be more like aware and focused on these things, and be allies for other people and stuff like that as well too. But circling back, you have to break down some of those barriers and get to know people for the core of who they are and their identities in order to get people to care, to understand, and make those connections.
Sure. And the making those connections and getting people to understand things is one part of it. But another part of it is then how this affects the value chain in a business and decisions that you've had to either talk through or make on a daily basis. We had discussed various issues that pop up on your day-to-day that students and future marketing managers are going to have to handle. And so how do we prepare students for having those conversations in a business sense? We had talked before about various calls that you've been on revolving DEI and how it affects from culture to culture, and how it affects from even one state to another state. And so having students equipped with the knowledge and equipped with examples that they can bring to that conversation, I think would be helpful. Do you agree?
No, absolutely. Because I think that, especially from a student perspective, which it's been a while since I've been in undergrad and things of that nature as well too, I think it's hard to believe that some of these things happen, or even knowing what type of conversations occur within DEI. So, I mean, I think it is important to bring up like some of those examples that way, because start to prepare yourself for those conversations. And I think, I'm going to start off by saying that you have to understand that you're not going to know everything in DEI. You never will. I never will. Like, I literally, when people are like, oh, okay, Shelly's an expert in DEI, we're in, and I'm like, no, like, I'm not an expert. I'm very knowledgeable. I do my due diligence. I do my work because it's my job and I love what I do, but I'm not an expert in all things DEI. And it's just simply not possible, because like what you were talking about with how things vary, even here from state to state, global DEI is probably one of the most humbling experiences that I've ever been through. Trying to, I didn't mention this in like, my intro or anything, but it's like, I'm a biracial female from Baltimore, and I moved down to Florida for college, and then I've traveled a little bit. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I understand everybody's lived experiences, especially on a global scale. So, like with the position I'm in now, I have leaders that sit in the UK, that sit in Cape Town in South Africa, that sit in Singapore. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I understand their experiences as a white man that's in UK, that's the leader that I have there, as a Black woman that's in Cape Town, South Africa, as the Asian woman that's sitting in Singapore, like I have to, even though I understand the DEI concepts, they have to meet me where I'm at, and I have to meet them where they're at in order to make it work, because I can't come into their areas being like, okay, this is what we're doing for DEI, because DEI might not even mean the same thing that it means here in America. So also understanding that when you're going into these conversations, you have to level set in order to understand what that person's definition of DEI may be before you can even start getting into conversations. Make sure everyone has the same definitions of DEI. And I'll explain that a little bit more to give it an example. I think this is one that we had talked about before, where I had we were working on some training, and it was using stock photos, wanted representation in the training from different communities. And I had my team from Germany contact me, and they wanted to ask me a question about transgender representation, and whether or not, when using stock photos of transgender women and men, should it be visible, like you can visibly tell that they're transgender, or should it be someone that, I guess I'll use the term like passing, like you wouldn't be able to tell that they were transgender, so to speak. And even though I'm the head of DEI, I don't have the answer for that. I'm not transgender. I'm an ally to the community, but I'm not going to sit here and say that what is right or what should be, what's appropriate for that community or what they would want to see, because I just don't know. And I wouldn't, and even if I thought that I did know, I still wouldn't answer on behalf of the community, because I'm just an ally. So those type of things come up, are going to come up, especially for marketing managers as well too, who are creating content. And that's why you have to be so careful. You can't create content for a certain community without their presence and without their input as well too, because that's where it's going to come off as, like, even though it's well-intentioned, it's going to come off as harmful if it's in the wrong direction.
So then your feedback to them was to get input from the community, bring in community members from the transgender community into those meetings to have a conversation about making something a little bit more appropriate with their advertising.
Yeah, just having a conversation of what works for this community. What as a community do you prefer to see in order to feel represented? Because that's the goal there, was to have transgender representation. And so
right.
Can't make those decisions without having transgender representation in the room.
Sure. And thank you for that example. That does highlight the point. And maybe backtracking a little bit here, when we're talking about a lens and how you're dealing with people in different countries, and so that lens can change. And so how would you define DEI, like on its basic principles, versus the other principles from other countries that you have to deal with? And then how do you, from a global business sense, kind of marry those? Because it seems like in your job, you're the facilitator of a lot of these different parts of the world. And so how do you melt all of those different definitions and lenses together?
It helps to understand the history of DEI in order to get to it at its core. Because I mean, DEI, which I feel like a lot of people will notice, it is very Americanized at its core, because that's where it started, was with America. It came from the civil rights movement, started out with I think like racial sensitivity training and stuff like that as well too, and then developed into what it is now. And so a lot of different countries pull from like the DEI like programming, so to speak, but then also have to make it their own. And I think that's what people have to understand as well, is that you need to localize your thought process, your programming with the people who are actually boots on the ground in that country. Like, you can have the solid foundation as to knowing where DEI stemmed from and the definitions and things of that nature, but then asking, what do these look like for this country, this area. But also it makes it confusing as well too, is the people. That's why you have to ask multiple people in order to get a little bit of understanding, because one person isn't going to be a representation of their whole entire country, or their identity, or their community, or their race, and things like that as well too. So you have to kind of take it for what it is. And what you'll notice is, the more we talk about this, is DEI is the sea of gray. Like, you have to be comfortable with sitting in the sea of gray.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, and within that gray, you have mentioned before that when students graduate, come out of college, and then know before another company is hiring our students, you have some that maybe have never even heard of diversity, equity, inclusion, their place in the workplace, and then some that are fully activists in this space. And then within that, there's a lot of gray area and different opinions and thoughts and feelings on the topic. And so when they come into the business world, and you're managing people that then have them as their colleagues or entry-level employees, can you walk through a little bit of what that looks like and the expectations that students should have on both ends of that spectrum?
Of expectations that students should have when going into corporate, whether they're just learning about DEI or they are kind of at least have a foundational knowledge?
Yeah, so we had talked about before about how some are very passionate about DEI, and they may be very intentional when going into business meetings or having an opinion about certain things in the workplace. While others haven't even come into contact with these terms before, and so aren't really sure how to approach that situation.
I think so. When coming into an organization, especially because I know like statistics show already that Gen Z and the generations that are entering the workforce and stuff like that are very passionate about DEI. And I think that's one thing to definitely be focused on, is if you want to make headway in this space, you need more than passion. You have to make sure to do your due diligence to understand what DEI actually looks like as a strategic function within the organization. And I mean, when you're coming in or even looking for a job, definitely be on the lookout for what companies are doing in the sense that may be performative, because you can get a lot of companies who maybe on their website, like say they support things, they're giving back, they're doing all the things, but until you actually understand the metrics of what that organization is doing, you don't really know whether or not that's performative. Like, they could sit up there all day and, say, we care about the LGBT community, we support, we do pride, things of that nature. But then it's like, does everyone in the LGBT community feel psychologically safe within the organization? Do they feel represented? Do they feel included? Like, if you don't have that information, you don't know whether or not that it's performative. So I think my advice to both ends of the spectrum of people who are looking for DEI and coming into organization, do your research on the organization. A lot of organizations post yearly reports. It's going to be called like an ESG report, environmental, social, and governance. And it'll literally be like a 30-page report going over kind of what they've accomplished for the year, what they're focused on, what their 2 to 3 year looks like as well too. So for those that are passionate about it, you can definitely do your research into an organization beforehand to kind of filter through what may be performative and what's actually intentional. Because I mean, intentional is always going to be work. So you're going to see the work that's being done, so to speak.
Yeah, and so piggyback off of that if you're a student that is doing all their due diligence, doing all the research, and then they come into an interview and they're asking about practices, and the company is very forthright about that information, like you just explained, and then they get into their role and their position. Can you walk through some of the expectations that a student should have, where maybe a company is working through some of these things, and it's not a very fast moving process, and have to be comfortable with the way that business develops and the way that companies change. So can you walk through that a little bit of how companies change and the expectations focused on that change?
Right. So actually, it's so important to know, because that's one thing you have to remember. How we talked about level setting with the definition, that's also one thing to help level set as well too, is understanding the stages within an organization. for DEI and kind of managing those expectations as well too, and realizing that off of 2020, DEI positions like doubled. So a lot of these organizations, DEI is not new by any means, but a lot of these organizations just started putting it in the forefront, getting these positions together and started making their plans. And you a lot of the times like don't see like bottom line results with like DEI programs for at least like 3 to 5 years. It's always fluid and it's always evolving. So if you're getting into an organization that just started putting a focus on this, you might not see all the big results and things like that as well too. And that's okay, as long as there's a framework and a plan. And a lot of the times what organizations will do is that they'll have like their plan. I'll say like market it or put in a policy or whatever it may be, showing what they're going to focus on for the next like 3 to 5 years and what results and goals that they're trying to fulfill. And so understanding and managing those expectations, that these things take time, because DEI, like even though I'm the head of DEI, I can't do it by myself. I have to have leadership buy-in, and it also is connected with culture, which culture is like is like typically within an organization, like shared beliefs, values, like norms of the culture, of the organization itself. And so that's a beast in its own that you also need to shift with DEI in order to get DEI infused into the culture. That takes time. That can't happen just because all of a sudden in 2020 you decide to hire a DEI person. So there's the different stages of the first stage, which is like underdeveloped, doesn't really have anything going on with DEI. Then there's like the second stage, which is kind of getting there, maybe more of on a compliance standpoint, conversations around DEI. Then they're starting to get a little bit more developed, and this is actually having like key metrics in place, like having budget, having like the buy-in, kind of making those connections, trainings. And then there's like leaders of DEI, which you can see through major organizations who are already like the Deloittes, the McKinseys and stuff like that. Like they're at the higher stages of their DEI journey and making those connections throughout the organization. So being able to understand where that organization is at on those 4 stages, I think will help students manage their expectations as to what they can see and what they won't. Because that's another thing that's important, is realizing that even though an organization may be on this DEI journey, it is key to understand that it is a journey. So if you don't necessarily see all the things that you want to see, the organization and the leadership might not be there yet to have those conversations. You can't start out, especially with taking DEI in an organization, with like race, power, and privilege. There's things you have to work up to in conversations with people in order to get there. So if you go in an organization and don't necessarily see all of the things, they might not be there yet. And the person and the DEI practitioner is working on the plan in order to get them there, in order to see that progress. It's going to look different for every company, and based off like, the leadership and things of that nature.
Sure. And I think that part of this discovery of this before going into a job, or discovery of this while you're in your role, seems to boil down to performative measures and intentional measures. And so can you walk through your definition of both, and maybe give an example of both, of performative and intentional measures outside of the company, and then performative and intentional measures inside of the company that a student would realize when they're doing pre-research and then in the role?
Sure. So performative, it's very tricky, because it's one of those things where if people don't realize what it is, they might not realize fully that the work they're doing is performative. Because I feel like, especially with the pendulum swing of DEI that came, you had a lot of people who came out who are very passionate about this, which is great. Like people who are in leadership DEI roles, they need those people who are passionate about it, and they're DEI champions and stuff like that as well too. But like what I stated before, just because you have passion doesn't mean that you can't also cause harm. Like for an example, at another organization I was working with, like we had It was for, I think it was for like national like Indigenous Day, which actually I feel like is coming up. Like I'm pretty sure it's like this month and stuff like that. And they wanted to do something on social media to like, have representation of Indigenous employees, things like that. So they came to me and was like, what can we do? We want to celebrate Indigenous Day. And mind you, no one on the actual team was like from that community, was Indigenous like themselves, but they wanted to be mindful of like representation that they're marketing and things like that. And they were really excited about this and wanted to have, and be inclusive in that way. But the truth of the matter is we didn't have Indigenous employees. And so at that point, that even though what looked like and probably felt like to that person a great idea, it's performative. And that's why you have to take that extra step of being like, even though we're trying to be inclusive and be positive and include everybody, does this make sense for our organization? Does this actually affect Indigenous people within the organization? Do we have this representation in our organization? Because then at that point, what would be intentional would then be asking, why don't we have Indigenous employees at our organization? Let's think it a step further. How can I help with creating the talent pipeline for Indigenous employees versus how can I get them on my social media site? You get what I'm saying? Like that.
Sure, absolutely.
And then, like I said, you can have people who don't understand because like I said, I'm sure with the intent of that was to be inclusive, to be like, oh, I want to make sure I'm including everybody, but not realizing that if they went ahead and did that, that actually would have probably been more harmful because who is that benefiting?
Right.
And so understanding that, I mean, and that's more of like, I guess like an internal example because no one would have an understanding from the outside of what an employee population looks like. So from the outside, when doing your research, I'll give another example. Like we just got through Pride Month in June. And so one of the key things that people will start to notice is the rainbow wave. You'll see a whole bunch of organizations like change their logos on LinkedIn to rainbow to stand with the LGBT community and things of that nature. And that actually probably was more powerful like this time of year, but had an even higher focus just with everything that was going on with the LGBT community and like their rights with Florida, with SCOTUS and everything like that. But my point is that can be considered performative if we're not doing things internally within the organization to support LGBT community, to make sure that they have a seat at the table, to make sure they have representation, to make sure they feel included, psychologically safe to be themselves. Like, are they able to talk about their partner? Are they included? Is their partner included in their benefit setup? Things of that nature, because if you're missing some of those key things and then changing your logo to rainbow just to be like, I stand with LGBT, that can be performative in itself. And so being able just to have that extra lens to think through some of those things that you see and not necessarily take it for face value, I think is going to be key for all marketing students and just people in general who care about DEI and are getting into an organization.
I think that's a really good distinction that you're making. And I think that tying in earlier parts of our conversation of having students identify where they are, where other people are, and then bridging that together and then using business practices as examples to bolster that opinion. Then some of the talks that were coming from my students was in makeup companies. So some makeup companies would promote diversity, equity, inclusive behavior at their company. And then you look at the shades of various makeup lines that they offer, and the darker skin tones are very minimal shade distribution, where then the lighter skin tones have all of this shade distribution. That really opened up my mind of, wow, you're right. That is, some makeup companies are promoting DEI for, various ongoing marketing campaigns. And then other companies are saying, we incorporate the widest amount of shades from all skin tones throughout our skin palette. And that alone, without even having to voice that we are DEI supportive, is supportive in that nature. Is that right. Sort of what, right?
Right. Okay, that's intentional. They intentionally did that to be inclusive of everybody, which makes sense because they want to sell more products as well too. And how do you do that? You include everybody.
Right. Yeah, which obviously makes sense, right? If we're not only being inclusive, but then our quarterly earnings report looks better because we involve everybody. Um, and so the I think a lot of this comes down to one of the quotes that I have written down here as I'm looking at my notes is don't reduce your DEI practice to just food, fun, and activities. And being, I guess that's the definition of not being intentional, of just we're using this to throw a party and then the next month rolls over. And so we just go on to the next thing. And so you want to elaborate on that just a little bit here of it goes beyond logos and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I must have been on one of my tangents.
That's one of the, one of the several Shelley quotes that I have written down here.
I was like, and another thing, food, fun, and activity. No, no, but that's such a good point because, and I want to clarify because there is a part of DEI where you acknowledge cultures and bring that into the workplace, and that may incorporate food, fun, and activities. So
Sure.
all I'm saying is that it can't just be that. Like you can't just pull the calendar for holidays for the year globally and make sure that you write a post and acknowledge the different holidays or, doing the different heritage months and stuff like that. Those are important. So I want to put just specify and saying, I'm not saying that those aren't important. I'm just saying if we're also doing those things with acknowledging the different cultures, make sure it's not just that month that you're focusing on Black employees during Black History Month or elevating Black voices during Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month in September, that you're only elevating their voices then. Like this just needs to be an add-on. This can't just be the DEI plan, is to make sure that we're acknowledging cultures and throwing parties and doing the potlucks and things like that as well too. It's important, it's a part of it, but it can't be the sole plan. And I think a lot of people, because you had a lot of people, especially after 2020, who were just thrown into DEI, especially a lot of HR professionals, where all of a sudden it was like, oh gosh, all these companies are doing DEI. Let me just go to my HR team. And they probably had no background in DEI or maybe minimal exposure and things like that. And so what's the first thing you do? You go to Google, you're like, okay, what do I need to do to start? And so it's easy. And I understand why organizations do, because it's easy to start with, well, let's just acknowledge the holidays. Let's just celebrate that, because that's more along the lines of event planning and not actual strategic focus on doing tiny things to incorporate DEI into the culture. It can be an aspect of it. It can't be the whole thing. And DEI is not just food, fun, and activities. It's a strategic function of the business that makes money, saves money, and helps the organization complete goals. It's not food, fun, and activities. That's my tangent.
Well, I think that's a fantastic highlight, right? That this is a planned, orchestrated, years long strategic plan, like you said, and then we're using the various months, holidays, whatever, to just spotlight during that time, not to make the month the only time we do those initiatives. It's just spotlighting and then highlighting, and then you move on with your strategic plan.
Exactly. And that actually ties back in, because if organizations are only using that month to highlight those communities and whatnot, then it does kind of broach of, is this performative? Are we doing this just to say we acknowledge the holiday, but then are we actually elevating those voices throughout the year? That's the type of things where people need to come and question and start to, and that's the thing. It's okay to question and to keep questioning, because that's how you start getting down the road with different thought processes and figuring things out and not taking things for face value.
I think we've had a really great conversation, and again, I thank you for your time and input here. I do want to end with some tangible takeaways beyond everything, all the other takeaways that you've given, but just a list format. So other practitioners in our Tampa Bay community, outside of our community, that are impacted by what you're saying, inspired by what you're saying, and thinking to themselves, I want to make actual change within my business. what would be just a top 3, top 5 list for them? And then I'll ask you on the student side.
I think, for DEI practitioners in particular, get involved with the DEI community. Because a lot of us are teams of one or have very small team and stuff like that. Protect your mental health, protect your energy. This work is taxing, it is exhausting, and a lot of the times, or it should be most of the time, DEI practitioners who are in this, they're doing this because it is part of their passion and because they care. So it's like when you're continuing to have conversations about trying to get buy-in for DEI, like that can be deflating sometimes. So you have to make sure that you're protecting your mental health, protecting your energy, get in with the DEI community to meet other DEI practitioners. I have no problem sharing my information, my LinkedIn. Reach out at any time. I'm always down for a good DEI after dark venting session.
Perfect. Well, you'll get a LinkedIn invitations after this goes live. Then that's perfect way to find you.
You know what I mean? Like stuff like that as well too, and make sure that you just stay on top of the pulse of the climate, because it's probably going to get even more difficult within Florida in particular, especially the closer we get to election. So definitely just make sure to protect yourself, protect your energy, make sure to stay on top of just things that are happening with like socially, things that are happening business wise with DEI as well too. Those are kind of be like my 3 recommendations. Those are things that I know that I practice myself in order to keep my sanity in line with doing this work and stuff like that as well too. For students who are getting it, make sure to do your research. Start with yourself. Start with even looking at what DEI means on a personal level to try to figure out what lens you have now and what blind spots you have now in order to kind of start unlearning or relearning or working through or expanding your thoughts as well too. So that way you can come in with the open mind to be able to have those more difficult conversations, because like what we discussed before, it's okay to have an echo chamber to make sure to continue like learning and to elevate your learning. But the point of this work is to talk to people as well who may be in the middle or who maybe are not bought in as well, because we need to call people into the fold. DEI includes everybody, and that's how we move the needle. So you have to start with yourself before you can even get into the professional aspect of DEI as well too. And make sure to utilize the free resources that are out there in order to learn more a little bit of what DEI looks like as a strategic function, because DEI is one of those areas where it's difficult to put into words as to what it is that we do. So it's easy to look at the food, fun, and activities and be like, okay, this is what DEI is, but it's deeper than that. So just making sure to start with yourself, utilize the free resources out there to continue learning, to continue reading the books and stuff like that as well too, and reach out to DEI professionals. A lot of us are very open to talking about our experiences, to helping students who come in, because that's allies for me. That's allies for our other DEI professionals who are interested in this. I'm always open to talk about it as well too, and talk about how to get into the DEI field or how to incorporate it into your position that you may be looking into as well. So make sure to all get started on your networking, not even from a DEI perspective, but just in general, to continue learning about how you want to make an impact business wise.
I think that's a really good point overall too, that you had mentioned that there are employee research groups out there. Most businesses have them. There's also plenty of communities that people can reach out to. So maybe a good rule of thumb for people is, I'm starting to have this opinion. I feel myself either getting angry about something or being confused about something. And so your first thought should be to go to some of those research groups and just educate yourself on various issues that are targeting those groups, or just the activities and things that those groups are doing before making judgment.
Yeah, and it's like you can't be afraid to ask questions. It's okay not to know everything in this space. It's okay to ask those, but as long as you feel safe with the person you're having a conversation with, it's okay not to be the smartest person in the room. That's how you're going to continue to learn. So don't ever feel bad about asking a question about a blind spot that you may have, because that blind spot you may have is maybe something that you've held on to since your childhood and how you were raised and your experiences and things like that. And so if you've had that narrative, like for me, I'm 32 years old. So if I've had a narrative for 32 years and then all of a sudden I have a conversation with someone that completely changes my lens, that's something different, that's going to be hard to accept. Of like, well, I've been walking around for 32 years with this, with this.
Right.
I'm not sure I believe it. I'll have to do more research and stuff like that as well too. Those things happen, and that's going to happen on this journey as well too, because it's not about right or wrong, and it's not about and one of my mentors said this to me, which like I'm about to like put it on a t-shirt and a wall and stuff like that, but it's not about being right, it's about getting it right. And that's the journey, and that's the work. No one will ever say that DEI is easy, because it's not. There's just going to be things on your journey that is going to make it easier, but it'll never be easy. The DEI work is intentional, which means it's going to be work.
Chelly, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So much great information there. I know you mentioned a little bit about LinkedIn before, but just to end, where can people find you? How can they reach out to you to learn more about what you're doing?
Oh, I'm a LinkedIn junkie. They could definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn at any time. They'll see that my profile is very active. So that's the best place to reach out to me.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you again for your time. And we're looking forward to having you again, and possibly definitely out to UT to speak to our students here.
I'll be there with bells on. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.